Hey everybody and welcome. So for today's video, I want to go over how to prevent duplicate cases from occurring in your org using Apex. So if that sounds something interesting or useful to you guys, do consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, the code will be linked down in the description box below. And also, if you have any questions or comments or want to see videos on a specific topic, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I do tend to try to create videos based on what you guys are currently wanting to see. Okay. So the inspiration for this video came from this Salesforce idea that I saw posted a very long time ago. It turns out that you can't, well, there really isn't an easy way of handling duplicate cases. Now, if you read down here in all these different comments, there's various ways of going about it. I do remember seeing that, that we do have the duplicate rules under the setup in our Salesforce org. But interestingly, it looks like we can't create one for cases, which is kind of weird. And I did look around, the setup, and I do see that there's something called, called case merge right here, which allows you to merge a case that might be similar. But if you kind of read what it says here, it's like it's only up to 3 cases. And, anyways, you're still allowing a case to, a duplicate case to kind of be created. So I thought to myself, it might be kind of neat if we can write some code that kind of prevents a case from being created in the first place if we kind of deem it to be a duplicate case based on some criteria that we can specify. So pretty much the end result will look something like this. So you see here in my Trailhead org, I have, 2 recently viewed cases. And let's say, for example, that we say our criteria for a duplicate case is just that the subject is the same. That might not be the case for you guys, but I think, once we kind of go through this code together, that we can kind of see how you might fit this for your own use case. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is copy this subject here, and let's go ahead and try to create a brand new case with this, just so you guys can kind of see how this thing works here once it's all been said and done. So I'm going to go ahead and create just a random case, brand new one, and I'm going to set the subject to be to something that I already have in my org. And what should happen when you click on save is basically this right here. So you see we get a little error message, and it says that there's something wrong with the subject field. And if you read down below here, it says a case with the same subject already exists. So, that's pretty much what we're going to be building today. So let's jump into the code. Okay, so in my VS Code here, I've kind of already done some of the work, just enough so you guys don't have to watch me write code forever. I went ahead and created a trigger on the case object. And as you can see here, it's nothing great. It's not that great. I'm sure you can create this and do this much better than I am, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So on the case trigger here, we are going to be firing on before insert and before update, and I just have a switch statement that fires based off the operation type. So if it's a before insert, it's gonna call this check for duplicate case method on the case duplicate check Apex class, and we're just passing in a null and then a trigger.new, which is just a list of those new cases. And as well, something that I didn't show in the demo earlier is on before update, if for example you have a crafty user that might think maybe I can get around creating a duplicate case by creating a case that doesn't have a duplicate subject but then changing it after the fact, well this would also prevent that from happening. So basically anytime someone tries to update something, it will also check for that subject and make sure that there's no duplicate cases based off that criteria. And as you can see here, we're using the exact same method. The only difference is we're passing in a map containing the old version of that case, and then as well the new cases being in the list format. So I think pretty self-explanatory there. Jumping into the case duplicate check, this is I guess where we're going to kind of code along together hopefully. So first thing I want to do here is I guess we can just start by defining that method that function that we had just gone over in a few seconds ago. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to say this is a public, and I'm going to just make this static void check for duplicate case right here. And like I said, this method function, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be called on both the before insert and the before update trigger operations. So we need to be able to handle, both of those. This function will always be expecting to receive a map containing the old version of the cases being processed. And, let's suppose this trigger operation is on before insert. That means, this map would be empty. That's kind of how it would work here. So we're going to create the case, and I'm going to just call this old case map just to keep things simple. And then we're going to have our list here we'll just call this new case list, just to stay concise. And in here, we are going to have some things, right? So what I want to do is I want to create a map, and that map is going to be used to hold all the subjects that, all the subjects for the cases that we're going to be processing via this trigger. And what I want to do is I want to hold a string for that subject because it's just text. And then we'll hold the case as well, just to know where it came from, or rather where this string subject, which one it belongs to, which case, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and call this case subject map, and we'll just initialize it with its type, like so. So once we have that, I want to go ahead and start iterating through our cases for both the scenario of a before insert and before update. I'm just going to iterate through the new case list just to keep things simple. So we'll say new case right here, and iterate through the new case list like this. And inside here, I want to basically have, some type of conditional, right? And this conditional is basically verifying whether we need to check this case against our duplicate criteria, whatever it be. In this case, like how I said, just to keep things simple, I wanted to say that a duplicate case is one that has a the subject being the same as one already entered in the system. So instead of just writing all the conditional logic in this if right here, I'm just going to create a brand new method, and we'll call this is duplicate case check needed, something like that. I don't know if that name is great, but I think it gets the point across. We're going to check to see if that case is actually needed, that case actually needs a duplicate check. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll just pass in the new case, just a subject, I think. No. So what we're going to do is, if you recall, like how I said, this has to work for both before insert and before update. So in order to make that a thing, I think we'll pass in the old case map here. And the reason why I'm not passing in, the specific old case, by doing like a get, is because we don't even know if this case map will be initialized or not. Because if it's on before insert, if we go back here, this map will be null. It won't even be initialized, so you can't even call the .get method on it. You'll get I'm pretty sure like a null pointer exception or something along those lines. So we're just going to pass in the whole reference for now. It's not a big deal. And then we'll pass in the new case that we're currently iterating towards. And then if something happens, then we can go ahead and do our duplicate check, right? So before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and create that is duplicate check method right here. So we'll just make it a private static void. I'm making it private because I don't expect this function to be called outside of this class, as opposed to this, check for duplicate case one being public, because we actually are using it in our trigger right here. So private static void, that's the name of it. Here we are going to be passing in a case. We'll call this, a map of cases. So the ID and the case, old case map, and then the new case itself, just called it new case right here. And in here is where we'll have our duplicate check criteria. And like I said before, we could have just had that in this if right here, but I like to kind of separate out my logic a little bit so it's not as messy, or at least I try to. Anyways, so in here what I'm going to say is I'm going to have a boolean that's going to start off as false, and then it'll change to true if our criteria is met. So we'll say is check needed, and we'll, like I said, just start off as false. And then at the end, we're going to just return it is check needed, like that. And in between here, we're going to have our actual criteria. And the first piece of criteria, I think, is just to check if that subject field is even populated, because if it's not, then we don't need to do any further checks. It just passes it along to the next case. So I'm going to say if the string is not blank, and that being the new case. So new case dot subject, like that. If it's not blank, then we can go ahead and proceed with our actual duplicate case check needs. So, and here is where we kind of start to work with the concept of the before insert having that old case map being empty, and if it's an update, then actually contains something. And like how I said, we could have just tried to pass in instead of passing in the entire case by reference, we could have tried to, pass in a null for a case instead. But I think it kind of would have cluttered up this here too. So, just to keep everything nice and concise and looking simple, I want to have the actual implementation criteria or logic here instead. That kind of just makes more sense to me, if that makes sense to you guys. So anyways, I'm going to say here, if the subject is not blank, then we actually need to do something, right? So I'm going to say, for the scenario in which it's before insert, we're expecting the old case map to be empty because you wouldn't have a previous version of that case if you're just doing an insert, right? So I'm going to say, if the old case map like this is null, or for some reason, and I don't know if this is even necessary because I think in the trigger, you're always going to have, I don't know, like a scenario in which, you would have the old case map not being null, but not having anything in it, since, right here we just have hard-coded always being null if it's a before insert. But I guess if someone's trying to use this code outside of its intended purpose, I don't know. Anyways, just keep it this way. So we're going to say if this is the criteria here, well, that's pretty much all we need for a before insert, right? Because at the top here, we already checked that the subject is not empty. So, the way you can read this is, if the subject is not empty and it's a before insert, well then, yes, we do need a duplicate check, and we should set the is check needed to true, right? So before I forget that, we'll just say is check needed, and we'll set this to true. That's the first scenario, right? And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to put this in parentheses, which is like the first scenario right here. So again, reading it is, if the subject is not blank and basically it's a before insert, then we're done. Just say is check needed equals true. And then, because we want to have another scenario, the one being where the old case map is not empty, meaning this is an update, we're going to have an or statement right here like this. So or, and then I'm going to have, I guess we can do another parentheses just to kind of make sure that it actually looks separate. So, kind of reading this, it's either this or this has to be true before this check gets set to true, right? If that makes sense. So in the second scenario, we're now talking about updates. So in this case, because it's an update, the old case map, it's going to have an old version of the new case that we're currently updating. So I'm going to go to the old case map, and I'm going to get the new case by the ID, like so. And then we're going to just grab the subject, and we're just going to do a very simple check. We're just going to say that it doesn't equal to the new subject, like that, okay? Basically what we're doing here is just adding a simple check. So we're going to say, if, let's say, for example, we already have a case in the system, right? So if you go back to our org, for example, this one right here, we have this case already exist in our system, and the user for some reason decides to do an edit, right? Well, we don't actually want to do a duplicate check unless the user changed this subject field to something else, right? And the reason I do this is just, just to kind of make things a little bit more efficient. Like we don't really want to do additional work if we don't really need to. The only time you would want to do the additional work is, again, if this got changed, and that's kind of what's happening right here, right? So on this second condition, this being the update, if the user actually changed the subject to something else, meaning that, the old version no longer equals the new version, then we want to do a duplicate check. I hope that makes sense. If not, feel free to leave your questions down below, and I'll do my best to get back to you guys. Okay, so one more time, reading from the top, we have a method called isDuplicateCaseCheckNeeded. It's supposed to it expects to receive a map of the old cases and a single new case. We have a boolean that starts off as false, and then here is our duplicate criteria, or rather, our criteria that we use to decide if a duplicate check is needed. So this is even before we do the duplicate check. And that criteria being that the new case has a subject and it's not blank. And if it's a brand new case being created on before insert, well, the case was just, the old case map is empty. But if it's an update, we want to make sure that the user actually updated the subject field itself. If either of those conditions is true, then the is check needed becomes true, and then that's what we return back. So up top here, when we're iterating through our list of cases that we receive from the trigger, we're saying here, is the duplicate case check needed for this new case? If true, based on this criteria, then we can kind of go ahead and start working on doing something that will allow us to do duplicate checks for the case. And basically what we're going to go ahead and do here is now we want to make use of this case subject map right here that we had created earlier. And then I'm going to say if the case subject map contains it contains a subject from the case that we're currently iterating through, like so. If this is the case that the current case that we're iterating through has a subject that already exists in our map right here, then that means this is a duplicate. And so what we want to do is we're going to add an error message on the subject itself. So subject add error like so. And then what we're going to say is there can only be one case with subject of, and then just do a little plus right here, and then say subject like so. And the reason why we're doing this is this check isn't so much for checking against duplicates already in our system. This is for the case in which you're doing like a bulk insert through Apex, or a bulk insert via a data load or something. The way you can think of this is if you're doing a data load, for example, of cases, and in your spreadsheet it might be the case that you have two cases with the exact same subject column, right? So this would be caught, this duplicate check would catch it here instead, if that makes sense. So anyways, we're going to say if this is not met, then we want to go on to the next thing, where we actually want to put the actual subject of this case we're currently iterating through into the subject map itself. So now we're going to say case subject map put, I believe is the method, and we're going to just put that case subject in there as the key, and what we want to put in as the value is just the actual case itself, so like this. And basically, like how I said, we're going to iterate through all the records that are either being inserted or updated. If we happen to insert two records at the same time that have the same subject, fire off an error. Same thing for an edit, I guess. If there are none, or if there isn't one that's the same in this map, just add it to the map itself. And now at the end of this entire for loop, we now have a map that contains every single subject and that case. So once we have that outside of the for loop, what we want to do now is actually do our conditional check. But before we do that, what we want to do is verify that this map is not empty, which it shouldn't be. If you're if you're inserting a bunch of cases, this will never be empty, right? Because you're always adding something to this case subject map. But I like to just still just do a check just to be super safe. So I'm going to say if the case subject map is empty, and then we have a little exclamation here which negates the operation. So we're saying if it's not empty, then go ahead and do something. And I guess I could have another function here to extrapolate the actual work, but I think it's fine. We'll just do it all here. So I'm going to say is we want to iterate through some cases, and I'm going to say the current case that we were going to be iterating through is the case in the database, so DB. And right here I'm going to just have a SOQL for loop instead of just doing a query and then storing that in a list or something. Let's just go ahead and kind of do it right here. And what I think we need is we're going to select the ID, the subject, and I think those are the only two things we really care about. So select the ID and the subject from the case object, and where the status, oh yeah, that's right. I guess we can add another criteria. We don't want to check for we don't want to check for cases that are already closed. If a case is closed, we don't really care about that subject anymore. So that is not a duplicate in this case. And I guess we probably should have done the same thing for here, right? If we're doing an update, we don't want to update a case that we don't want to check for a case that is open or not closed. So I guess we can check for that at the end. But anyway, so we're going to stay where the status is not closed, like so. And the subject is in our case subject map. So we're going to say where the subject is in, and then we're going to have this colon symbol to denote the fact that we want to use a variable in Apex and not some literal string like how we had right here. So we do colon, and then we can now reference a variable. So we're basically where the subject is not in our map here. which part? Well, we stored our strings, our subject in the string as key value pairs. So we want to get the keys from that. And the way we do that is by saying, give me the key set right here. So subject cannot be in this key set or the keys of this map. If that's the case, once we have that query, now we can iterate through every single one of those that returns something and then do some type of comparison, right? So what we want to say is, if we happen to find any cases in our database that contain a subject from this case map right here, then we have an issue. You want to, throw something out, right? And the way we do it is by saying, okay, grab the case subject map, and we're going to say, do you contain a key of the same thing? And remember, the key is always the string which contains the subject, right? So we're going to say, case subject map, do you contain a subject that the current case we're operating through, is it the same? So we're going to say case in database dot subject, like that. If you contain it, basically saying, if a case that already exists in our database has the same subject as something that we were currently just iterating through this trigger, then we might have a problem. And what I want to go ahead and do is, instead of just making everything kind of look long by saying dot contains key or dot get or something further down here, I'm going to just grab that case that is in our subject map. So that way we can do an easier comparison. So I'm going to say case, just call it new case, I guess. And we're going to say, let's grab that thing from the actual map. So we're just going to grab like that. Basically, this will allow us to grab the case that has the same subject as the one in our database. This case right here is the one that came from iterating through our trigger. Okay. So now we want to do, I guess, another check just to be 100% sure that this is a duplicate case. What I want to go ahead and do is say, let's grab the new case and let's grab the ID of that. If it doesn't equal the ID of the case that we're currently iterating through in our database, then we know for sure that it is a duplicate case, right? Because now we have two different cases with two different IDs that have the exact same subject. Therefore, that has to be a duplicate. So grab the ID like this. And now what we're going to do is basically do the same thing as we did right here. So I might just go ahead and copy that right there. And I guess because now we're doing comparison between a case that we're iterating through and one that already exists in the system, I'm going to give a different error message. I'm going to say a case with the same subject already exists. And instead of throwing out the subject of that case, let's throw out the ID, right? The ID of the case that already exists in our database. So I'm going to say case in DB like that. Dot ID. Okay. Hope that makes sense. So I'm going to hit save on that. And one more time, just to kind of go through it right here, we're going to create a for loop. We're going to iterate through all of the cases in our database that meet this criteria. The status not being closed and the subject being the same as the ones that we iterated through at the beginning of our method. Those cases being the ones that came from a trigger fire, whether it's before insert or before update. As we're iterating through those cases in our system, we're going to be checking or comparing against our subject map. And basically, if that case subject map contains a subject that already is in the database, then, like how I said, we might have a problem. So that's where we check against IDs. And right here, this ID check is very important, and it works for both before insert and before update, right? Because if for example, let's say this was a before insert fire, well, this new case ID would be null, right? And a null will not equal a case ID that already exists in the system, so therefore they're different cases. If it's a before update, it's same thing. This new case that is trying to be updated is not going to equal one that already exists in the system. And if it does, that means it's the same case. So don't throw an error, right? If that makes sense. Okay. Like I said, I know I'm not explaining this well. It's been a very long time since I made a video, so feel free to leave any questions or comments down in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you guys. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit save on this and make sure that everything looks good. I will go ahead and deploy this to my org just to make sure that we can actually, they actually did something right because I kind of showed you guys the demo at the start. And it looks like we have some errors right here. So let's see, right here, it says condition expression must be of type Boolean. Oh yeah, and that's because this method right here, private static void, it should be returning a Boolean. We have to explicitly say that. So now let's go ahead and deploy this source to the org, and hopefully we don't have any more errors. And there we go, no errors. So let's hop back into our org. I'm going to refresh this right here. We're going to go into our cases. Let's grab this one now. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab this subject right here. And I guess let's just go ahead and try to create a new case. So right here, I'm going to set the case origin to phone. And I think that's the only other required field. I'm going to hit the subject right here. Let's try to hit save. And of course, we get the error message because we already have a subject that already exists. And now for same thing for an update, right? So if I go back to cases, and I guess let's grab this subject right here now. So copy, and let's try updating this second case right here. And let's try updating it to be the subject from a different one right here. And let's hit save. And you'll see we get the exact same error message right here because, you know, we're trying to update a case to something that already exists, and therefore it's a duplicate according to our rules that we set up. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, yeah, I did promise right here, because we're iterating, we only care about cases that are not closed. I guess technically in our update criteria right here, we would probably want to say, you know, is the new case status not equal to like closed and something else, just like that. So, you know, that way we're not, if we're going to be, if we received a case that's closed in our trigger, it could just be ignored safely like that. So if it's, you know, it's not closed and subject changed, then go ahead and do something. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. But yeah, hopefully this was not a mess of a tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoyed, learned something new. Like I said, feel free to leave any comments down below. Let me know if you guys want to see videos on any type of topic. Please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.